my name is Margaret Adele, and today I will be crocheting my way through yet another video, not only because I like showing off that I can do it without looking, but also because I bought more yarn when I wasn't supposed to, because I'm supposed to be destashing right now, so I'm crocheting extra in penance. But today we're going to be talking about how I get a lot of books for very cheap, legally. Crucial caveat there. The best way to get cheap books legally. Now, I did a blog post about this in late 2024, but this seems an evergreen topic, at least right now, as we careen towards a new recession. Hopefully just a recession, but regardless, this is my way of getting a lot of books for very cheap because I both read a ton. I average somewhere between 130 to 150 books a year, except for 2020 when I got to 168, but 2020. And I am already sitting at 37 books for the year, halfway through March. So who knows? Maybe I will set a new record. But regardless, I got a thing around money from childhood poverty. I don't like spending a lot of it. And in fact, I can be frugal to a fault and cheap out when I really shouldn't. So I have had to find ways to both assuage my stuff around money, but also still keep myself full of books. Now, the kind of books I read might not be what you read, and in fact, a lot of what I just naturally gravitate towards is a lot of the stuff that already tends to run cheaper, like out-of-print mass market paperbacks and indie books, but you can still at least save some money compared to other methods with some of these tips. Just know that your mileage is going to vary. Oh, and also, a lot of these tips are predicated on the idea that you're not buying a ton just to buy a ton. It's based on the idea that you are being thoughtful in what you pick to read and aren't buying a ton of books just for the hype of it. Actually making sure that you want what you're using your money on. But we're not going to get into an entire thing about that. We're not also going to get into an entire thing about piracy. I don't really want to wade into that discourse. But I will say that if you are looking to get indie books from indie authors, especially self-published authors, and you can't afford them, most indie authors would prefer that you just contact them directly and ask for a free review copy rather than using piracy sites. While the likes of James Patterson and Nora Roberts won't be that affected by being on piracy sites, they can hurt, if not destroy, an indie author's career, and most of them do have ways of getting free copies to you. So maybe let's avoid those for indie authors, at least. Okay, now, what are my tips to get a lot of books cheaply? The first one is the most obvious, but not quite as useful as everyone tends to make it out to be when we're talking about how to get books cheaply, and that is the library. Now, yes, this is obvious for a reason. Libraries can be great. Emphasis on can. Now, I live in a killer library system. Not only does the library have 3 different branches in my town alone, but it's also connected to a ton of towns around us. So even if one of those 3 branches doesn't have the book I'm looking for, I can get an interlibrary loan really easily. I very rarely have a problem getting a trad published book from my library. But not everyone's going to have that. If you're living somewhere really rural or you just don't have a well-funded library nearby, this isn't exactly the one-stop fix-all that a lot of people try to pretend it is, like it can just replace everything. I've been someone without easy access to a library before. I mentioned this when I talked about how I accumulated so many books, but there was a 6-year span in my life in which the only library I had access to was my school library because we couldn't even afford the gas mileage to go into town from our very rural house all that often. So no, a public library is not the catch-all answer for everyone that wants to read cheaply, but it is a great option. I've recently been on a library tear. I think I've read like 5 different library books this month alone. And of course, you have the likes of Libby and Hoopla. Libby especially I love because of audiobooks, because those can be so expensive. And finding those for free, that's money saved right there. But don't feel bad if you don't have this killer library system. A lot of people don't. So we are going to go on to some other ways that you can save money and actually own the books you're reading. Second up is the second most obvious, and that is secondhand. Also brought up a lot when we're talking about how to get books cheaply. Also sometimes used as a fix-all. Secondhand books are a great way to get books not only cheaply, but also being eco-friendly. But there are some drawbacks to it. One, you have to know of where to go to find the secondhand bookstores. Yes, there is thriftbooks.com online. I use them a lot personally, and I do like that you can get free shipping for only $15 orders. Now, with the kind of books I'm getting, that means I usually have to put at least 3 or 4 books in the cart because I love schlocky, pulpy, mass market paperbacks from a decade ago, okay? The 90s and 2000s, they were just weirder and they were better off for it. But if you want to get the newer books, the hyped books, the current darlings, you're going to be paying a lot more. In some cases, if you're getting the currently most hyped books, you'll be lucky to save even a couple bucks off of the regular retail price. But if you are willing to wait and look around at your local stores and use thrift books to fill in the gap, you can get a lot for pretty cheap. Now, granted, this isn't something I think about very often because I don't care about being aesthetic. In fact, I've thought about doing a video about how I should win the award for least aesthetic reader. But yes, there may be some damage on your secondhand books. Now, I like it. I think it adds charm when the spine is all creased and there's weird writing in the middle that you don't understand. Like, what were you doing, Viola? Like, what is this random writing in here? I love it. But if you don't like that and you want your books to be pristine, you are, again, going to be paying more. But me, I kind of like it when my office looks like a secondhand bookstore in itself. I think it has character. Hello. Good news and bad news. Bad news, I over-glucosed myself yesterday because the tastiest iced coffee drinks have the most sugar, and my insulin resistance got really mad at me. So I took the rest of the day off. Good news, I am in the finishing stages of that project, so I come back with a different thing to crochet as we continue our list. Now, this next tip is a thing not everyone knows about, judging by the fact that when I talked about it on Blue Sky, a lot of people responded with like, wait, that exists? And that is reading books outside the realm of copyright. You may have heard of Project Gutenberg, a nonprofit organization that is determined to help save basically all forms of books by making digitized versions of everything that is in the public domain. Now, these are obviously going to be older books, but they are free, universally free. I honestly have not bought a physical copy of a classic in forever. And there's also LibriVox, which does the same thing, taking books outside the realm of copyright and making them widely available, but for audiobooks. And this is my favorite. Now, they are narrated by volunteers, so the quality might not be totally top-notch, but I've never had any issues. I recently finished Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, and I greatly enjoyed my time. The volunteers are really dedicated to the cause as well, but these are awesome if you want to start tackling more classics. I especially loved it when I was in intro to theater class in college and I had to read A Doll's House. I listened to the free audiobook version of it where every character was individually cast, so it sounded like a radio play. Now, obviously, the biggest downside of this one is you can only read books that are outside the realm of copyright, i.e. published a very, very long time ago. But there are some classics that remain evergreen. You get free versions of Little Women, The Secret Garden, Persuasion, and Pride and Prejudice. There's plenty to be had here, even only sticking to the older books. And again, free audiobooks. They're so expensive, man. Take the free ones when you can. Up next is a resource that is also for free audiobooks because apparently I'm an audiobook girly now, and that is here on YouTube. A lot of indie authors will upload audiobook versions of their books, usually narrated by themselves, and you can also find other read-alouds of classics. Now, word to the wise, some of these channels may be using AI voices. So if you need to like suss it out, listen very closely to character voices. Even people that aren't professional like narrators know that when they're speaking as a character, they should use a different inflection, but an AI voice doesn't. I do remember when I was listening to the Scarlet Pimpernel in what I thought was a regular audiobook channel, the character went brr, but the AI voice went B-R-R-R-R-R. So I was like, oh, okay. we're gonna find a different one. And I did, and it was lovely. Love the Scarlet Pimpernel, by the way. Great LibriVox audiobook. But again, you're not necessarily gonna get the top-notch quality of a professional narrator, but there is a kind of charm in listening to an author read you their book themselves. And I like it. I like being read aloud to, I have discovered. And for legal purposes, we are just going to talk about those kinds of books, okay? We are not going to talk about the other versions of audiobooks that end up on YouTube that should not be here, okay? Don't get me in trouble telling people I told you to go there. We are just talking about indie authors uploading their own work and classics. Got it? Got it. This next one is less of a you shall go out and get this thing and more of a make sure you're using this up. And that is Spotify. Yes, we're talking about audiobooks again. But regardless, if you pay for Spotify Premium, you have access to 15 hours of audiobook listening time a month. And it's 15 hours at one-time speed. You can't game the system by speeding up the books. I've tried. But regardless, it doesn't roll over. So if you don't use those 15 hours that month and the next plan goes in, you've just lost the time. And that's really tricky for me. I always forget when it rolls over, or when it goes over rather, so I tend to miss some months, but I'm trying to train myself that I should always look at Spotify first and use there instead of using up my Libro FM credits. But if you don't already have Spotify Premium and you want to start an audiobook subscription service, go with Libro FM. Way better ethically. This next one is something I'm strangely sentimentally attached to, and that is BookBub. BookBub is an email subscription service where you set up a daily reoccurring email for yourself. You pick a specific time, a specific set of genres, and also what service you're going to be using to receive the ebooks, i.e. Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Not a lot of options in that way, but every day at that time, the service will send you an email with ebook deals in your genres and on your preferred platform. This was a huge deal for me because it's actually how I started reading indie books in the first place. I didn't realize it at the time, but generally speaking, if you open the email and you see a free ebook, it's usually indie published. So by the time I realized that, I'd already been reading a ton of indie books. It's how I got started reading that much and then eventually reviewing it in the first place. So yeah, I do have a sentimental attachment to this one. Now, obviously, the issue with this one is not all of the deals will last very long. In some cases, if you miss the daily email and you go back to it a couple days later, the sale might already be over. And of course, you're kind of stuck using just Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But if you're good with that, or you're getting all the free ebooks and so not giving your money to them, that works just as well. This was actually a service I ended up using specifically because I needed to spend as little money as possible after buying my Nook, and I was obsessed with getting my money's worth of it when it was the largest purchase I had ever made at the time, and I definitely did, and it was definitely because of this service, so I would highly suggest you check it out. Up next are two options that we'll talk about, both around reviewing, i.e. paying for your book in a review instead of money. And I know that can be tricky for a lot of people, but once you get into it, it can actually be a lot of fun to dissect a book and get into the pacing and all of that. And also, you just look smarter when you're actually reviewing the books. But regardless, first up, we're going to be talking about digital ARC sites, like your Edelweiss, your NetGalley, your Booksprout. Normally, this is the place where I would add also Book Sirens, but then they allowed a book with an AI cover and a title that was called The Planet of the Rapes on their site, so fuck them. But regardless, these other sites are a delightful way of getting interesting and upcoming books for free just to write a little bit about them. In most cases, you don't even have to have that much of a following online. I don't necessarily have a very big one, and I have no issues getting NetGalley books. Now, granted, again, I'm not going for the big upcoming romantasy darling, so I'm not competing quite as hard. Maybe that comes into it more later, but even when I had a ratio down in the 50s or 60s, I could still reliably get books. Just depends on what you're going for. So again, one of those things where your mileage will vary depending on what type of thing you're trying to get. And still, again, fuck Book Sirens. This last one is the most terrifying, but also the most rewarding, and that is just going out and talking with indie authors and asking for review books. Now, I know that's really scary for a lot of people, having to just cold message. So I would suggest you start out by like looking for ARC signups on social media. Some indie authors will do it that way, but I've already moved past that. Now, I can't claim to be the person that actually got me started on this. An author named Shammy Stovall sent me an email in December of 2018, and she was the one that cold messaged me and was like, hey, do you want to review my book? Because I had been talking about indie books on my channel, and I was like, this is a thing you can do? You can just have emails to each other about reviewing books and it works? And I quickly got obsessed. And to show you how often I've been doing this in the 6 years since that first review came out in January of 2019, these two entire shelves right here, this entire shelf, all physical indie books sent to me for free by the author. And this isn't even all the physical copies I own, okay? This is just what could fit on the shelves. Shammy Stovall alone takes up 90%. It's literally all Shammy Stovall, little bit of Destin Munden and GM Nair, and that's it. She's prolific. But regardless, I also have a bunch of physical copies sitting in a drawer that couldn't fit on my shelves, and that's not including all of the gigantic amounts of digital copies I have gotten from authors. A lot. Like, to show you how simple it is once you've set this up and gotten the ball rolling, when I realized that I didn't have enough trans books for the Trans Rights Readathon happening later this month, or actually, it's actually only in a couple days now, as I'm filming this. Hopefully I'm on that by the time you're watching this. Regardless, when I realized that I didn't have enough, I literally just posted on Blue Sky like, hey, indie authors, I'm under a book buying ban, but I've got this Trans Rights Readathon coming up, so if any trans authors want to test it, that you probably have a pretty good chance of getting a review copy right now. And within 1 hour, had 3 review requests in my inbox. That's how fast this works. I have gotten to the point where I have to turn away at least half of the review requests I get because I'm getting so many, just because I've established myself as someone that reviews indie books regularly. But at first, I did have to do a lot of the reaching out myself. I perfected the art of, it's a pretty good book you got there. You know, I have my own book blog and a booktube channel over here. So, you know, if you got a review copy, I got a review. And it usually worked. I've also gotten review requests from simply just contacting an author whose book I read to make sure I had their last name correct. Multiple times. I'll be like, hey, I'm going to be talking about your name on a booktube channel. I don't really know how to pronounce it. Could you give me the pronunciation? And just the knowledge that a booktuber was talking about their book on a channel, I would end up on an ARC list. It's so cool. Indie authors are so ready to give out review requests. And yes, I know in a couple of cases you'll end up with drama around it, but like 99.9% of the time, it's gonna be a good time. Some of the authors that I reviewed have become besties. Like, you may have heard me mention my bestie, Laura Diaz de Arce, was originally an author whose work I reviewed, and we just became the ultimate book besties. It's great. It's terrifying, but it ends up great in the end. And that is it. That is my way to find books for cheap. And please remember that, again, your mileage will vary with some of these. But if there's one that I missed and you know about it, please let me know down in the comments. I will also have a Google Docs in the description with links to the various sites that I talked about. And I may be updating those with more if I learn about more options. Oh, and yeah, things might be getting iffy in the upcoming future. Everyday new horrors, but we can still find ways to get through and refill the well with great books. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.